In October 2016, three young friends vanished without a trace on the Appalachian Trail near the Newfound Gap summit in Great Smoky Mountains National Park. For 5 years, they were presumed dead, victims of an accident, getting lost in the woods, or an animal attack. But in August 2021, one of them suddenly appeared outside the town of Gatlinburg, alive but unrecognizable. What he told police when he was finally able to speak left even seasoned investigators speechless. Where had he been for those 5 years? And what really happened to them? Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. On October 15, 2016, the Newfound Gap area in the Great Smoky Mountains greeted visitors with typical fall weather. Thick fog blanketing the road, cold damp air seeping into every crevice, and visibility limited to just a few dozen meters. That morning, three young friends, Evan Marsh, 26, Lucas Brann, 25, and Maya Ellison, 23, entered the third day of a trekking trip they had prepared for together over nearly a month. All three were from Knoxville and saw this trip as a milestone before Evan moved to Nashville for a new job. Lucas took a break before a long-term project at his engineering company, and Maya wanted to enjoy a few quiet days before her internship. According to information provided by their families, the group was well prepared: a lightweight 3-person tent, GPS device, printed maps of the Appalachian Trail section from Newfound Gap to Clingman's Dome. On the night of October 14th, they set up camp about a mile from the Newfound Gap parking lot, near an elevated spot with a view down into the Oconaluftee Valley. Other hikers camping nearby reported that the three seemed happy and showed no signs of anything unusual. However, around 10 p.m., a group of campers 150, 200 meters away noted metallic sounds echoing from the forest to the south, like something striking rocks. At the same time, Lucas reportedly saw flickering lights among the trees, too regular to be natural reflections. Maya, who liked to take notes, recorded a few sounds on her phone out of curiosity. No one considered these phenomena dangerous, and the three went to sleep after confirming their plan to break camp early the next day. Evan's backpack-mounted action camera captured the last moment they were seen, at 6:42 a.m. on October 15th. The fog was extremely thick. The three were packing up camp, checking the map, and then heading onto the trail toward Clingman's Dome. According to their agreed plan, they would return to the parking area by late afternoon and send an update message to their families as soon as they had signal. However, by the evening of October 15th, no family received any contact. Calls and messages went unanswered. Anxiety grew the next morning when the usual morning message, an essential part of the group's communication routine, did not arrive. Families tried calling multiple times, but all three phones were either out of service or completely off. By early afternoon on October 16th, with the unusual prolonged silence and no sign they had descended the mountain as scheduled, Evans and Maya's families immediately contacted the Sevier County Ranger Force to report them missing, providing the full planned route, departure time from home, and camping location. Just minutes after receiving the report, the Great Smoky Mountains Coordination Unit activated emergency protocol, mobilizing rangers and a search and rescue team to the Newfound Gap area, using all data provided by the families to narrow down the last known location of the group. At around 3:20 p.m., the first ranger team reached the campsite described in the itinerary Evan had sent his mother on the evening of October 14th. The tent was pitched on a high ledge, in the style of experienced trekkers, open, level, and easy to observe the surroundings. However, everything in the area indicated an interrupted presence: tent stakes half removed, one sleeping bag still open, the camping stove placed off to the side, as if someone had just used it but hadn't finished packing. Among the items, rangers noted a half-folded printed map, a water bottle more than half full, a tripod with a broken leg, but no signs of external impact. Everything was marked and photographed per standard procedure. Then the search team established an initial 500-meter radius sweep, Based on experience in the area, SAR divided into 3 directions. One group followed the Appalachian Trail south, a second checked the eastern slope where terrain is prone to slipping, and a third expanded into the dense western forest. Concurrently, the drone team deployed 2 units for aerial scanning. However, the afternoon fog at Newfound Gap was unusually thick, with weak light rendering thermal and optical cameras unable to detect any notable movement. Even when drones switched to low-altitude terrain scanning, the ground under the canopy remained too dark to capture signs of life. Meanwhile, the K9 team used scent samples from Evan's clothing for tracking. The dogs initially clearly identified the direction from the tent area to the main trail, but at the intersection between the trail and a natural slope about 200 meters from camp, the scent abruptly stopped. This led the SAR team leader to note an unusual situation in the report. The scent vanished suddenly without spreading sideways, no diffusion into deeper forest or down rocky slopes, as typically seen when hikers leave the trail. Manual sweep teams checked every soft ground section along the trail for footprints, slide marks, struggle signs, or any disturbance. Results were completely empty. Ground intact, dry leaves evenly covering, no broken branches, no drag marks, no dropped items. Another team was sent down the southern creek for possible slips, but the water was shallow, rocks flat, with no slide marks or fresh signs. A helicopter was mobilized late afternoon to scan the Okanalufti Valley, but limited visibility kept the observation range very low. By 6 p.m., the search expanded the radius to 1.5 miles, sweeping cliffs, natural pits, and dense forest sections prone to disorientation, but the entire area showed no trace of the 3 ever passing through. Preliminary assessment: the group's trail was interrupted almost immediately after leaving camp and entering the trail. The campsite was marked as the last known point, and SAR prepared to shift to larger-scale search tactics the next day, as this disappearance did not fit any typical lost hiker pattern at Newfound Gap. Early morning on October 17th, SAR immediately launched the expanded search phase, increasing the sweep radius to over 12 miles in all plausible directions the group could have moved in thick fog and steep terrain. Teams were distributed in concentric circles, prioritizing high-risk points like cliff edges, steep rock fields, and rarely used side branches of the Appalachian Trail. Sevier County helicopters flew along major Southern Valley cliffs, using infrared cameras to search for body heat or anomalies on rock surfaces, but results showed intact ground, no slide marks, no impact damage or broken brush that a high fall would cause. The eastern creek was checked by deploying thermal scanners along the water and sending a team wading upstream to look for scratches or entrapment signs, but the shallow, steady flow showed no indication anyone had fallen in or been carried downstream. As SAR continued expanding, a group of local hunters approached rangers with information about old early 20th century mining shafts north of Newfound Gap, near the Elkmont ghost town area. These mines were deep in the forest, unmaintained, with dangerous and hard-to-access entrances, so not part of standard search routes. However, despite considering the possibility hikers could have wandered into them, survey teams could not enter due to high collapse risk, and no signs the 3 had headed that way. Over the next 10 days, SAR continually expanded in layers, including old trails, animal paths, and little-known route intersections. Not a single item, footprint, broken branch, or ground disturbance was recorded. All logical movement routes were scanned by drone and helicopter at least twice daily, but no images showed human presence. By day 18, the search began scaling back manpower due to cooling weather and lack of real progress. Interviews with hikers passing the area during the disappearance days yielded no new information. No one saw the group after the action camera recorded them leaving camp. On day 21, per county protocol, SAR ended active search operations and shifted the file to missing, no further leads. The families continued self-organized searches for weeks, but all efforts met silence. When all data was transferred to the FBI for criminal element evaluation, federal investigators concluded there was no specific evidence of attack, abduction, or suspicious persons in the Newfound Gap area. What remained was a disappearance in the mountains, where 3 people vanished simultaneously without leaving any movement traces, physical evidence, or tracking direction. The official file remained a cold case, and the incident gradually became one of the most inexplicable mysteries ever recorded on the Appalachian Trail. Nearly 6 years passed in silence, until the evening of August 2, 2021, when an unexpected call came into the Sevier County Emergency Dispatch. At 8:17 p.m., a pickup truck driver reported seeing a man walking barefoot along Highway 321, about 5 miles from downtown Gatlinburg, staggering as if struggling to stay balanced. The man wore a torn gray t-shirt, pants caked in mud, long hair covering his shoulders, and carried no belongings. The witness described him as emaciated with ribs visibly protruding under the thin shirt, gaunt face, deeply sunken eyes, and slow reactions to vehicle lights. When the driver stopped to ask if he was okay, the man did not respond, just stood silently for a few seconds before continuing toward Gatlinburg, as if not fully aware of his surroundings. The nearest police station immediately dispatched a patrol unit to the scene. When officers approached, the man showed clear disorientation, severe exhaustion signs, and delayed reflexes. When asked to stop for a safety check, he staggered a few steps before collapsing near the road edge. Officers noted his body was abnormally cold, despite warm weather, severe dehydration, scraped knees and wrists, feet with deep calluses and cracks, as if he had walked continuously for a long time without shoes. Initial checks for ID found no items on him. Under flashlight, his face was clearer, long unkempt beard, ashen skin, eyes constantly scanning officers' movements, but no verbal communication. However, when his head was propped with a jacket and asked his name, the man responded with intermittent sounds, trying to say what sounded like Evan Marsh, then passed out. Police immediately placed him in emergency status and called an ambulance to transport him to the University of Tennessee Medical Center in Knoxville. Meanwhile, dispatch officers ran national missing persons checks based on the description. Minutes later, Evan Marsh appeared in the list of the 3 2016 Newfound Gap victims, with the file still open and no remains found. This match prompted dispatch to report urgently to the Sevier County Sheriff's Office for rapid verification. What started as a routine exhausted person on the roadside turned into an event tied to one of the strangest disappearances in the Appalachian region. The ambulance left Gatlinburg at 8:43 p.m., taking nearly 40 minutes to reach Knoxville. During the ride, he regained consciousness multiple times, but panicked at door sounds or flashlight beams. Medical staff noted weak pulse, unstable blood pressure, and prolonged physical depletion signs. They tried asking for more personal information, but he could not speak coherently, only occasionally repeating his name like an instinct. Upon arrival, the hospital rushed him to triage and sent fingerprints for verification to Knoxville PD. At that point, the Sevier County Sheriff's Office had sent a representative to the hospital for cross-checking. Less than an hour later, fingerprint comparison confirmed a perfect match with Evan Marsh's 2016 records from the disappearance with Lucas Brand and Maya Ellison. Initial confirmation was documented internally and sent to the National Search Center. An urgent notice went to Evan's family requesting they come to the hospital for visual confirmation. While waiting, police secured the intake area to protect identity and ensure safe medical evaluation. Concurrently, the Sheriff's Office reopened the full 2016 file, backing up route maps, prior search notes, and all data on the group's last known point. An internal bulletin went to all units. One of the 3 Newfound Gap victims has possibly been found alive. This prompted Sevier County to reprioritize the case, even before family visual confirmation. Around 10:10 p.m., Evan's parents were escorted to the secure hospital area. After observing basic features, bone structure, small scar on left eyebrow, eye sockets, jawline, they confirmed the man was their son. Hospital administration immediately completed identity verification records and sent copies to the sheriff's office. From that moment, the three-person Newfound Gap missing file shifted from cold case to active reinvestigation required, meaning all old data would be re-examined and any new developments regarding Evan Marsh treated as an independent event that could yield clues about the other two. By around 11 p.m., the sheriff's office issued an internal notice to related units confirming one of the missing victims had been found alive, but depleted, requesting information be withheld from the public until medical and formal identification steps were complete. The sudden reappearance of a person missing for nearly 6 years, with no signs related to the other two, immediately put all area forces on high alert. As August 2, 2021 ended, though initial data was limited to health status, discovery location, and the name he gave, Evan Marsh's emergence was enough to reactivate the full Sevier County investigation mechanism, officially reopening a file thought buried since 2016. Right in the night, and extending into the early morning of August 3, 2021, the identity verification process was implemented according to the standards for long-term missing persons cases. The technical department of the Knoxville Police Department received fingerprint samples from the hospital and proceeded to compare them with the national NCIC database. The results showed a perfect match with the fingerprint record of Evan Marsh, which had been stored since May 2016, when he completed his job application procedures in Tennessee. Following that, Evan's dental records, provided directly by his family from the clinic that had monitored him for many years, were entered into the comparison process. Although the found man showed signs of malnutrition and many loose teeth, the jaw structure, positions of old fillings, and a small chip on the left front tooth all matched completely with the stored dental data. The identification unit completed the identity confirmation report at 1:12 a.m., forwarding it directly to the Sevier County Sheriff's Office. After obtaining official results from both fingerprints and dental records, the sheriff's representative, Lieutenant Mark Sanderson, held an emergency meeting with the investigators who had participated in the 2016 missing persons case. The meeting took place in a small conference room at the county office, where the entire old case file was retrieved from storage for the first time in nearly 6 years. The original documents, including SAR search reports, area maps, the timing of item seizures from the tent, and FBI notes from 2016, were all presented again for comparison with the new information. At 2:05 a.m., Lieutenant Sanderson signed the official document changing the missing persons case of Evan Marsh, Lucas Brann, and Maya Ellison from cold case status to active investigation, while noting that this was a case potentially involving undetermined criminal elements. Immediately after the case was reopened, the sheriff notified the FBI Knoxville field office as required for mandatory cooperation in long-term missing persons cases where a victim reappears, especially when involving a national park area. FBI Representative, Special Agent Rebecca Hale, was assigned as the federal point of contact, coordinating directly with the Sevier County Investigation Team and the Great Smoky Mountains Ranger Force. By 3:10 a.m., a joint investigation team was established, including sheriff's investigators responsible for collecting data from the 2016 scene, the FBI handling situation analysis, assessing potential federal crimes, and coordinating technical aspects, and rangers responsible for providing terrain information, movement routes, and high-risk areas within the park. The investigation team quickly compiled a list of data to be collected or compared within the first 24 hours, including determining Evan's current health status to assess the possibility of taking a statement, examining items still retained from the 2016 scene, re-evaluating the terrain around Newfound Gap and the Appalachian Trail related to the trio's movement route, and updating all previous missing persons reports from hikers or locals around October 2016. Concurrent with reactivating the investigation file, the Sheriff's Administrative Department issued an internal notice requiring maximum restriction of information leaks to the outside, emphasizing that the reappearance of a victim after nearly 6 years missing could attract significant media attention and interfere with the process of clarifying the truth. Evan's family was requested to provide all data related to his daily habits, equipment carried, and the group's detailed itinerary before the disappearance to aid in comparison. As the identity confirmation steps were completed and the first case file review meeting was scheduled in Knoxville, the joint investigation team agreed that all old assumptions from 2016 needed to be re-examined from scratch because Evan's appearance not only reopened the case but also raised fundamental questions about what had truly happened over the nearly 6 years. From that moment, the investigation focus temporarily shifted to a different direction, assessing the physical condition of the surviving victim. Right in the morning of August 3, 2021, the University of Tennessee Hospital, in coordination with the Joint Investigation Team, implemented a series of comprehensive medical examinations to determine the extent of physical damage, duration of environmental exposure, and survival capability of Evan Marsh during the long period without social contact. First, the medical team drew blood samples to analyze basic indicators, focusing on levels of vitamin D, B12, minerals, electrolytes, and liver-kidney function. Initial results showed Evan's blood vitamin D level was nearly zero, far below the minimum threshold needed to maintain normal bone and muscle activity. This is a characteristic sign of prolonged lack of sunlight exposure, inconsistent with the survival pattern in the wilderness, which would still allow some sunlight exposure, even in dense terrain. Additionally, ferritin tests revealed severely reduced iron stores in Evan's body, consistent with prolonged malnutrition and lack of protein and mineral-rich food sources. Next, full-body X-rays recorded 4 locations of previously fractured ribs that had healed improperly with misalignment, indicating injuries that occurred many years prior without proper medical intervention. Thin bone structure and abnormally low bone density demonstrated that Evan had undergone a severe prolonged period of nutrient deficiency, combined with lack of normal movement. The imaging doctor noted additional old cracks in the right arm bone and left foot bone, both healed but misaligned from their original positions, consistent with cases of severe impact or falls without medical assistance. After completing the bone examinations, the medical team proceeded to assess muscles and the motor system. Evan had clear difficulty standing up, walked slowly, and could not maintain balance without support. Tests of the quadriceps and calf muscles showed high levels of atrophy, nearly equivalent to someone kept in a state of restricted movement for many years. This result ruled out the possibility that Evan had survived alone in the woods, as daily movement, no matter how difficult, would not cause such severe muscle atrophy. Skin and soft tissue evaluation revealed deep calluses around the ankles and wrists, in the form of circular friction marks characteristic of prolonged binding. Doctors noted that the skin in these areas was thickened, darkened, and showed signs of chronic inflammation, indicating these were not recent injuries, but formed over a very long time. Additionally, Evan had numerous small scars scattered along both arms and back, mostly unevenly healed scars from tears or light cuts. This suggested he had experienced an unsafe living environment without basic medical care. Another factor, further reinforcing the assessment of long-term control, was the dull, rough skin lacking elasticity and featuring many dry patches. These characteristics only appear with prolonged dehydration, unsanitary living conditions, and restricted exposure to dry air, contrary to the humid mountain forest environment, which rarely causes such manifestations. Digestive system examination recorded a shrunken stomach, weak intestinal peristalsis, better response to soft foods but intolerance to high-fat foods or large portions. This is a classic sign of victims severely restricted in rations, forced to live on minimal and nutrient-poor food for an extended period. In addition to cellular tissue tests, the medical group also evaluated hair and nail conditions. Evan's hair was falling out extensively, with thin and dry strands, indicating prolonged protein and mineral deficiency. Nails were thin, brittle, and had vertical ridges, one of the common indicators of chronic malnutrition. When synthesizing all medical data, the specialist team reached a unified conclusion: Evan's physical condition did not match any long-term natural survival model. From vitamin deficiencies, muscle atrophy, misaligned bone healing, malnutrition, to binding marks on wrists and ankles, all pointed to the victim having experienced confinement in a restricted space for many years, not independent survival. The official medical report was completed in the afternoon of August 3rd, over 14 pages long, including a key finding based on bone, muscle, soft tissue conditions, and nutrient deficiency levels. The victim could not have sustained life through wilderness survival for the entire 5 years, but must have undergone a long period of restricted movement in a low-light environment. After reviewing this conclusion, the Sevier County Sheriff's Office updated the investigation status, officially changing the file from missing to abduction and long-term captivity, marking the case as no longer an ordinary missing persons incident, but one involving prolonged kidnapping and imprisonment. This reclassification became a critical turning point, providing the basis for the investigation team to trace back the location where Evan was held and the conditions he endured during his disappearance. As soon as the investigation direction was clearly established, the next focus shifted to assessing the victim's psychological state. On August 4, 2021, a team of experts including psychiatrists, clinical psychologists, and behavioral specialists was invited to the University of Tennessee Hospital to conduct cognitive and reflex tests in a controlled environment. The evaluation took place in an isolated room with lighting minimized at the doctor's request due to Evan's signs of sensitivity to bright light. As soon as the expert team entered, they noted Evan's initial reaction was to turn his face away and curl up when the door closed, repeating this each time there was sudden movement or sound from the hinges. Throughout the process, Evan maintained a defensive posture, with shoulders hunched, head slightly bowed, and eyes constantly scanning the room corners in a vigilant reflex. The experts noted that even faint sounds like a pen tapping lightly on the table or slow footsteps in the hallway caused Evan to startle noticeably, taking several seconds to stabilize his breathing. Reflex tests were conducted to determine sound differentiation ability, reaction speed, and vigilance level. Each time an unexpected knock sounded from behind, Evan exhibited a quick head turn and neck retraction, similar to reactions in victims who experienced threatening confinement environments. When the doctor tried adjusting the room's brightness, a 20% increase in fluorescent light caused Evan to cover his eyes with both hands and turn toward the nearest wall, indicating high light sensitivity, a trait common in those deprived of natural light for extended periods. The evaluation continued with behavioral and stress level measurements. Evan consistently maintained rapid breathing, tense shoulders, and facial muscle contraction whenever asked about details related to his missing period, even without requiring actual information. In particular, the psychology team noted Evan's tendency to repeat certain short phrases under high stress. These phrases were not explained or contextualized, but appeared reflexively when Evan felt pressured. The experts recorded these phrases by coding them as keyword responses for behavioral technical analysis without interpreting them as stories or motives. An important point, emphasized in the internal report, was the strong connection between Evan's physiological and behavioral responses. When asked to perform simple tasks, such as standing up or approaching the table, Evan paused for several seconds, as if waiting for some form of permission signal. This waiting for command reaction is one of the typical behavioral signs in victims subjected to systematic behavioral control in long-term coercive environments. Cognitive tests showed good recent event memory but interrupted mid-term recall, especially for the period before being found. The expert team determined this was not due to acute brain injury, but a natural avoidance reflex common in those under prolonged psychological pressure. Another notable point was Evan's overreaction to non-threatening situations. When a specialist suddenly stood to retrieve documents, Evan immediately leaned back and raised his hands to cover his head. When the door opened to bring in water, he turned toward the nearest wall, as if avoiding sightlines. At the end of the evaluation, when asked to perform simple hand movements to measure muscle coordination, Evan complied with slow, cautious motions, eyes always directed at the specialist, as if awaiting further instructions. This was recorded as patterned compliance conditional obedience, typically seen only in victims controlled by fixed rules. The 11-page comprehensive report was completed on the evening of August 4, in which the psychology expert team concluded that Evan's reactions did not fit the pattern of wilderness survivors, who typically exhibit scattered panic and situational responses rather than a conditioned behavioral system. The collected data, from avoidance reflexes to door sounds, sensitivity to sudden light, prolonged defensive posture, to repeated keyword responses, all matched the model of a victim who experienced prolonged captivity in a closed environment under continuous supervision and behavioral control. This conclusion was forwarded to the investigation team as important confirmation that Evan Marsh was not only physically confined, but also behaviorally dominated for an extended period, reinforcing the assessment that the case involved structured kidnapping and captivity rather than an accidental survival incident. On that basis, on August 5, 2021, the Joint Investigation Team agreed that Evan had reached a sufficiently stable psychological state to proceed with the first phase of statement taking, though still under medical expert supervision. The session took place in a special interview room at the hospital, with dimmed lighting and the door left slightly ajar to avoid triggering Evan's fear responses. The lead investigator, Lieutenant Sanderson, used a non-confrontational interrogation method, asking questions in chronological order to determine what Evan could recall about the 6 years of disappearance. In the opening part, Evan stated that he, Lucas, and Maya had left the tent on the morning of October 15th and continued trekking according to schedule. He said the three got lost when the fog thickened and they lost the trail, then tried to find their way back, but became separated while attempting to climb a rocky slope for better visibility. Evan said he fell into a shallow crevice, lost consciousness briefly, and upon waking could no longer find Lucas and Maya. The rest of the statement was described as extremely vague. Evan claimed he survived by sheltering in a shallow cave, eating wild berries, drinking stream water, and only moving at night to avoid wild animals. Investigators noted throughout the statement that Evan consistently avoided mentioning the long period after the first few weeks and only used phrases like, "I tried to survive," or "I got too lost," without providing specific details. When cross-referencing the statement with medical data, the investigation team immediately noted numerous inconsistencies. First, the severe vitamin D deficiency completely mismatched a wilderness living model, as even in dense forest, the body would receive some natural light. Second, the severe leg muscle atrophy indicated he barely walked for an extended period, contrary to daily movement needed for food and water as described. Third, the deep circular calluses around wrists and ankles were clearly signs of prolonged binding or fixation, impossible in mere forest living. Fourth, the 4 misaligned healed rib fractures indicated repeated strong impacts, which Evan never mentioned. Fifth, his description of drinking stream water did not match test results, showing severe electrolyte imbalance and prolonged dehydration signs, opposite to someone with natural water sources in the forest. Sixth, Evan's nails and hair showed characteristics of many years of chronic malnutrition, inconsistent if he could forage fruits and plants as claimed. Seventh, Evan's skin had irritation patterns from repeated contact with rough surfaces in circular forms, not matching outdoor living. Eighth, psychological reactions like fear of door sounds, fear of light, and avoidance reflexes did not align with experiences of forest living with stable natural exposure, despite lack of social interaction. Ninth, the shrunken colon and weakened digestive function only occur with severe long-term ration restriction, very unlikely if he could gather fruits and plants as stated. 10th, the overall muscle mass deficiency was completely contrary to the continuous activity required for wilderness survival. 11th, Evan's description of moving every night contrasted with foot bone injuries and deep calluses, indicating frequent standing or fixed contact with hard surfaces rather than flexible multi-mile movement. Investigators recorded over 10 such inconsistencies, but in the initial interrogation phase did not directly challenge them to avoid causing Evan panic or cessation of cooperation. Instead, they flagged the illogical points and added them to the technical analysis list. The statement session ended after nearly an hour, when Evan began showing signs of heightened stress, forcing the specialist to stop to prevent secondary psychological trauma. When placing all medical data alongside the newly obtained account, the investigation team agreed that Evan's initial statement could not yet be considered a truthful reflection of what occurred, at least for the majority of his missing time. However, rather than confronting or directly questioning, which could cause Evan to withdraw and stop cooperating, the team chose to shift to independent analysis, examining biological evidence to determine the type of environment Evan had actually lived in for nearly 6 years. This was seen as a necessary intermediate step to clarify why the initial account contained numerous contradictions with the medical data. Immediately after that decision, the environmental material analysis process was activated. On August 6, 2021, the interagency investigation team collected biological geological samples from Evan Marsh's body and clothing, including soil stuck under his fingernails, microbial dust in his hair crevices, microfibers adhering to his collar, and the remaining dried mud on his pant cuffs. All were sealed immediately at the hospital and transferred to the forensic laboratory of the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. The examination team focused on 3 main groups of materials: mineral particles, fungal spores, and synthetic microfibers. First, the mineral particle analysis revealed that Evan's fingernails contained a small amount of fine hematite, along with limonite particles and iron oxide ore with a flaky structure, characteristics not common in the natural soil layers at Newfound Gap, but matching the soil at abandoned mining areas formed from early 20th century coal and iron ore extraction activities. When cross-referenced with the park's geological map, the investigation team ruled out most of the Newfound Gap and Clingman's Dome areas because they primarily consist of decomposed granite and organic forest soil, lacking these types of minerals. The initial data indicated a high likelihood that Evan had prolonged contact with soil originating from a sealed mining tunnel. The examination team then proceeded to analyze fungal spores adhering to his hair and the stitching on his clothing. The collected spores exhibited characteristics of the Oniganaeals family, fungi typically found in dark, damp, poorly ventilated environments, characteristic of enclosed spaces such as tunnels, abandoned mines, or old underground structures. Notably, the samples included spores from the genus Pseudogymnoascus, a fungus that thrives in low temperature and stable humidity substrates, rarely encountered in open forest environments, but commonly recorded in long-abandoned stone tunnels. These microbiological results strongly inclined the investigation team toward the hypothesis that the victim had been confined in an underground structure rather than naturally sheltering in the forest, as previously stated. The analysis team then moved on to evaluating the synthetic microfibers collected from the collar and the inner fabric layer. These fibers consisted of coarse, flat polyethylene, commonly found in industrial material transport sacks or agricultural storage bags, but with coloration and surface characteristics specific to old sacks used in the mining industry prior to 1950. The presence of these microfibers further reinforced the possibility that Evan had come into contact with old mining industry items. After completing the individual analyses of each material group, the TBI cross-referenced the findings with the Geological Environmental Database of Great Smoky Mountains. Only a few areas within the park had small-scale mining operations in the early 20th century, with the most prominent being the Elkmont mining area, which once featured a series of iron ore and chalk mines, abandoned since the 1920s. This area has a history of numerous auxiliary tunnels, old ventilation systems, sealed entrances, and geology containing fine hematite matching the samples from Evan's fingernails. When the mineral particles were compared to Elkmont's sediment map, the match was nearly perfect. Additionally, previous studies of the ecosystem in Elkmont's old tunnels had recorded fungal spores similar to those obtained from Evan's hair. The investigation team immediately placed Elkmont on the priority list of suspect areas. In a quick afternoon meeting that same day, the FBI representative proposed creating a detailed map of the entire Elkmont area, including secondary trails, mining tunnel systems recorded in historical files, old sealed entrances, and geologically unstable zones. The Great Smoky Mountains Rangers supplemented with field data, noting that Elkmont contains many auxiliary tunnels never fully surveyed due to high danger levels, including partially collapsed tunnels that might still have internal voids. When all data from soil, fungal, microfiber analyses, and mining history were compiled, the investigation team agreed that Elkmont had the highest probability of being connected to Evans' prolonged confinement. That very evening of August 6, the Sevier County Sheriff's Office issued an internal document designating the Elkmont mining area as the primary suspect location for field investigation deployment, while requesting the Ranger Force to prepare access plans for an area classified as one of the most dangerous in the park. On the morning of August 7, 2021, after Elkmont was officially designated as the priority area, the interagency investigation team shifted to geographic tracing to narrow down the specific location where Evan Marsh may have been held. The process began with using K9 scent tracking from Evan's sealed clothing samples taken upon hospital admission. The Sevier County K9 team deployed 3 dogs specialized in long-term scent trailing, trained to detect time-degraded scents. Upon approaching Elkmont Ghost Town, the abandoned settlement, once the center of early 20th century mining, all 3 dogs displayed consistent reactions. They did not focus on the abandoned wooden structures, but uniformly directed their noses toward the deep forest running along the Little River. As they moved gradually northwest of Elkmont, where old trails intersected with faded paths, the K9s began pulling strongly in a single direction, leading to a low hillside with numerous unusual geological traces. There, the tracking team recorded high-intensity K9 reactions. The dogs repeatedly turned toward a moss and small gravel-covered mound, an area not on tourist maps, but possibly once a material processing site from old mining operations. This sign aligned with the hypothesis that an auxiliary tunnel or mine entrance once existed nearby, but had been sealed or buried over time. While the K9s continued sniffing along the slope, the map analysis team began reviewing mining records from Elkmont in the 1910-1920 period. Drawings archived at the Tennessee Historical Library showed that Elkmont had at least 7 main tunnels and more than 10 auxiliary ones during peak extraction. However, after the mines closed in the mid-1920s, most entrances were sealed to prevent accidents for local residents. Smaller entrances or auxiliary ventilation shafts were not fully documented, especially those dug by local workers during the final expansion phase. When comparing old mining maps with current topographic data, the investigation team found that the K9 reaction area coincided with the location of an auxiliary ventilation shaft, faintly noted as VP3 on a 1918 map. This ventilation shaft was described as connecting from main tunnel number 4 to the western forest slope, but its length and current condition were unclear due to missing depth descriptions. Upon reaching the suspected location, the investigation team discovered unnaturally stacked earth and rocks, showing signs of old construction material rather than normal landslides. Close surface examination revealed flat stones arranged in low horizontal rows, a feature common in early 1900s ventilation entrances, originally covered with wood or metal plates and then buried to prevent accidents. For more accurate verification, the team used handheld seismic devices to detect subsurface voids. Results recorded distinct sound wave variations, indicating a void at least several meters deep. This reinforced the likelihood of an auxiliary tunnel that had not fully collapsed directly beneath the K9 stop point. The technical team then inserted a 5-meter probe camera through a small gap between 2 stone slabs. The camera captured a dark space below, with time-smooth stone surfaces and rotting wooden edges, likely remnants of old ventilation structures. More importantly, in the frame corner, a metal pipe segment approximately 20 centimeters long was visible embedded in the rock wall. Upon image magnification, the team identified it as a vent pipe, commonly used in 1910-1920 mining tunnels, matching Elkmont mining area archives. This trace confirmed the existence of a buried old ventilation shaft, providing solid grounds for an auxiliary tunnel below. With the ventilation pipe identified, the team examined surrounding terrain for feasible entrances. A moss and decayed leaf-covered slope on the eastern side of the mound had an unusual slight depression, indicating past soil compression. This could be a buried entrance post-mining cessation. The position was only a few tens of centimeters lower than surrounding ground, but soil composition showed past heavy weight, consistent with 1920s tunnel sealing procedures using earth and stone. To avoid collapse risks during access, the investigation team decided against immediate excavation, instead planning access per mine rescue standards. Rangers established a 50-meter safety perimeter around the suspect area and temporarily blocked civilian access. Concurrently, the area map was sent to FBI and TBI technical teams for modeling potential subsurface structures. 3D simulation based on seismic data and probe camera images showed a horizontal void approximately 30-40 meters long, with depths varying from 2 to 5 meters. This void aligned precisely with VP3 on the old mining map, strongly reinforcing the conclusion of a partially buried auxiliary tunnel. Given the clear evidence, the interagency investigation team agreed to deploy the park's professional tunnel probing team, coordinated with Sevier County's High Technical Rescue Unit. They prepared necessary equipment including rock stability sensors, portable concrete cutters, pulley systems for lowering personnel, oxygen meters, and helmet-mounted cameras. A step-by-step access plan was established. First, open a slot large enough for deeper camera insertion to assess safety, then evaluate rock framing and collapse risks. Finally, consider personnel descent, if conditions allowed. By the end of August 7th, all specialized equipment had been transported to Elkmont. The suspect area temporarily illuminated with portable lighting systems and detailed markings on investigation maps. After compiling geographic tracing, geological and K9 reaction data, the investigation team agreed that the operation had reached its most significant breakthrough since Evan Marsh's reappearance. For the first time in nearly 6 years, they had identified a specific, logical location fully consistent with collected material samples, an auxiliary tunnel likely used for prolonged confinement and carefully concealed in the Elkmont mining area. Accessing this site was seen as the boundary between the speculative phase and direct on-site verification. On the morning of August 8, 2021, after completing preparations and geological safety assessments, the Great Smoky Mountains Professional Tunnel Probing Team, coordinated with Sevier County's High Technical Rescue Force, proceeded to breach the suspected tunnel entrance at Elkmont. Based on seismic signals and probe camera images, they chose to open a slot at the most stable earth rock structure on the mound's edge. The entry process used portable concrete cutters and manual digging tools to minimize vibrations that could cause collapse. By 9:45, the opening reached 1 meter wide and 80 centimeters high, sufficient for inserting helmet cameras and oxygen sensors before personnel descent. The camera transmitted the first images of the subsurface void, a narrow but clearly structured space with manually flattened rock faces and 2 rotting wooden beams supporting the ceiling. After confirming permissible oxygen levels and no toxic gases, the rescue team lowered ropes and descended 2 technicians into the tunnel. The subsurface void was wider than initially predicted, approximately 12 meters long, averaging 1.8 meters high, divided into 2 small branches by a rough stone wall. The tunnel floor was compacted earth covered in long accumulated fine dust. About 6 meters in, the technicians discovered a semicircular recessed space on the right, later identified as the pit, a confinement area reinforced with flat stones wedged into wall crevices. There, the investigation team recorded 3 iron chains fixed directly to the rock wall with old-style bolts, each chain 50 to 70 centimeters long. Wear on the links was uneven, one chain heavily worn near the lock, the second worn in the middle, and the third nearly intact at the connection, but heavily worn at the end link. The team noted this because the differing wear indicated the 3 chains had been used at different times, not as decorative items or leftover mining equipment. Directly below on the ground near the first chain, the rock surface showed numerous parallel scratch marks, 5 to 12 centimeters long. The scratches were rough, uneven, and directed upward, indicating they were made by fingernails or small sharp objects scraping the stone. The technicians used rulers and recorded over 40 scratches grouped into 3 areas, coinciding with the 3 chain positions. Additionally, at the eastern wall base, a dark brown patch adhering to the rock tested positive for hemoglobin traces using quick test strips, confirming old dried blood. The sample was removed with a sterile slide knife and sealed in a storage tube. Continuing the examination, a small beige handkerchief was found in the deepest corner of the tunnel, covered in dust but with intact embroidered initials, ME. Although origin could not be determined on site, the investigation team prioritized this item due to potential links to a missing person. Not far from the handkerchief, on the ground near the rock wall, the technicians found a dark blue fabric piece, approximately 4–6 centimeters, frayed edges, suggesting it was torn from a larger item. The fabric surface had cotton fibers mixed with mineral dust, indicating long-term presence in the tunnel. All evidence items were marked with numbered stakes and photographed with scale rulers per sealed crime scene standards. Additionally, near the second chain, the examination team recorded a small metal object shaped like a curved hook about 3 centimeters long, likely used for securing or adjusting restraints. This was also documented and collected, though its exact function was undetermined. Notably, when scanning the ground with ultraviolet light, the technical team detected multiple droplet-shaped stains in the soil between the 2 chains, suspected to be long-dried bodily fluids. Stain positions were sampled per procedure, but could not be analyzed on site. Throughout the examination, the investigation team found no bodies or human bone fragments inside the tunnel. The air in the void was relatively stable, with no decomposition odor, supporting the assessment that if victims had been confined here, bodies had been removed elsewhere. All evidence, chains, scratches, blood stains, handkerchief, fabric piece, metal hook, were processed per evidence protocol, double-sealed in numbered bags, and transferred outside for transport to analysis labs. By late afternoon that day, the examination team completed detailed crime scene mapping, precisely locating each evidence item, the overall structure of the pit, and branch pathways. Geological survey results confirmed the area maintained minimum stability for continued exploration, allowing the investigation team to consider related subsurface spaces. The full scene report was immediately forwarded to the interagency investigation team, laying the foundation for the next step, assessing the scope of captivity and determining whether the pit was the only space used. Starting from that assessment, on the morning of August 9, 2021, immediately after completing the documentation and seizure of all evidence in the pit, the Joint Investigation Team decided to expand the search scope to the side tunnels surrounding the Elkmont area to determine whether other underground spaces directly related to the 2016 disappearance of 3 people still existed. Based on a rough mining map from the 1910–1920 decade, along with seismic data collected the previous day, the technical team identified 4 points likely to contain side tunnels, scattered within a 200-meter radius around the newly opened main tunnel entrance. The priority-marked area was to the north, where the old mining map indicated a temporary excavation branch used for ventilation, later abandoned when operations ceased. The tunnel probing team used wired cameras and acoustic sensors to survey each terrain fissure, focusing on vertical rock crevices showing signs of slight subsidence. At around 10:20 a.m., a small rock passage was revealed between 2 mounds of earth, with a width of only about 40–50 centimeters. When the camera was lowered, The transmitted images showed a narrow but extended space, with rock walls lightly worn in an uneven pattern, indicative of a tunnel that had been used and then abandoned midway. The technical team assessed stability and decided to widen the tunnel mouth to allow direct personnel access. After about 40 minutes of manual digging combined with rock-cutting equipment, the entrance reached a size sufficient for one technician to crawl through. At a depth of nearly 2 meters, the space expanded into a small chamber approximately 5 meters long and 1.3 meters high. In the left corner of the narrow chamber, the technician discovered an object resembling human bones, the upper part covered with a layer of fine soil mixed with mineral dust. When additional lighting was scanned, the body's form became clearer, an almost complete human skeleton lying on its left side, legs slightly bent, right arm folded close to the body. Remaining clothing included dark-colored jean fabric and fragments of a green cotton shirt, matching the description of Lucas Brand's attire on the day of disappearance. The forensic team was called down and began marking the scene. Based on the state of decomposition, only a skeleton with some soft tissue adhering at the pelvic area and bone stability, forensics estimated the time of death occurred within the first year following the group's disappearance. On the skull was a fracture about 7 centimeters long, with sharp, clearly defined break edges consistent with trauma from strong impact by a hard object. The body's placement showed no signs of natural burial. Instead, it was positioned close to the tunnel wall, torso facing inward, feet outward, a placement indicating intentional arrangement. There were no signs of scratching or personal items around the body, reinforcing the likelihood that the victim died elsewhere and the body was moved here. After completing documentation and collecting bone samples, the investigation team continued surveying other tunnel branches as seismic mapping indicated at least 2 adjacent voids in the Elkmont area. By 2 p.m., the probing team discovered a deeper rock crevice to the west, about 60 meters, via a curved path from the first tunnel, with a slight cold airflow emanating, indicating a natural internal ventilation passage. When the stone entrance was widened and the camera inserted, images recorded a larger space, nearly 8 meters long and over 1.5 meters high. Close to the right rock wall, beneath a large tilted boulder, the technical team discovered a piece of black fabric, along with a strand of long hair adhering to the rock. Upon further examination of the surrounding area, they located the second body. Unlike the first, this body retained considerable soft tissue on the upper torso, due to low temperature and stable humidity, slowing decomposition. The body was in a curled position, hands placed in front of the chest, legs trapped under the fallen boulder. Based on body size, hair length, and remaining clothing fragments, the forensic team concluded this was most likely Maya Ellison. Initial examination of the cervical vertebrae revealed 2 misaligned neck bones with signs of damage from strong pulling or strangulation force. There was no major skull fracture like the first body, but evidence of soft tissue damage around the neck area and a fractured third rib, consistent with pre-death impact force. The boulder pressing on the right leg did not cause injuries matching the cause of death, indicating it fell after the victim was already dead and the body placed or dragged into position. Additionally, the tunnel floor beneath the body showed a drag mark about 20 centimeters long, confirming the body was pulled into place rather than falling naturally. Although decomposition was less advanced than Lucas's, the forensic team still determined Maya's time of death to be approximately 1 year after the group's disappearance, based on remaining soft tissue analysis and environmental conditions in the side tunnel. Thus, both bodies were identified as homicide victims. The injuries, one from severe skull trauma, one from neck impact, were direct human-caused fatal forms, inconsistent with natural accident, collapse or fall into the tunnel. The body placements, one neatly in a narrow alcove, one dragged under a boulder, both reflected deliberate concealment efforts. By the end of August 9th, after completing the seizure of all bone samples, soft tissue, and related evidence, the investigation team created detailed maps of the 2 side tunnels and officially added them to the Elkmont file as spaces directly linked to the deaths of Lucas Brann and Maya Ellison. Based on body locations, injury conditions, and environmental factors, a preliminary conclusion was reached. Neither died by accident, but were victims of intentional murder in the context of prolonged captivity. This finding marked the case crossing from a single captivity incident into a serious multiple victim murder case. On that basis, on August 10, 2021, after the bodies were removed from the Elkmont Side Tunnel system, the Joint Investigation Team entered the comprehensive forensic analysis phase. The goal of this phase was to reconstruct the entire nearly 5-year timeline from the October 2016 disappearance of the 3 victims to the discovery of Evan Marsh alive. The process began with analyzing bone decomposition levels of Lucas Brann and Maya Ellison. The TBI forensic unit paid particular attention to bone color, brittleness, collagen loss, and mineralization ratio, thereby determining decomposition rates consistent with low temperature, stable humidity, and no light. Typical conditions of a mining environment. Results showed Lucas's skeleton had decomposition corresponding to over 4 years in a sealed environment, while remaining soft tissue on Maya indicated death occurring 2 to 3 years after disappearance. This confirmed the 2 victims did not die at the same time, and their captivity durations differed significantly. Next, the team analyzed evidence collected from the pit, focusing on wear on the 3 chains to infer usage duration. Chain link wear was measured under electron microscopy and compared to reference samples of metal oxidation rates in low fluctuation humidity, sealed environments. The first chain showed heavy wear near the lock area, indicating repeated forceful pulling over a long period. This wear pattern was compatible with continuous use for at least 18 to 24 months. The second chain had concentrated midsection wear, indicating more restricted movement, corresponding to approximately 12 to 18 months of use. The third chain, with less wear but repeated scratches at the end link, was estimated to have been used for about 6 months or less. The differences among the 3 wear levels reinforced the conclusion that victims were held in sequence with varying durations under conditions of fixed restraint with unequal chain lengths. During scene analysis, the investigation team recovered a small notebook in a rock crevice behind the pit. Most pages were moldy, stained, and corner broken, but date markings, circle/arrow symbols, remained legible in semiotic form. Without decoding textual content, behavioral forensics determined this was cyclical notation, marked regularly over time. Symbol rhythm changed, initially dense, then gradually sparse, abruptly interrupted around the estimated time of Lucas's death, then resumed in smaller quantity before final interruption, coinciding with Maya's death data. Based on this evidence, bone decomposition levels, chain wear marks, and notebook symbol rhythm, the investigation team constructed a comprehensive captivity timeline for all 3 victims. In the initial phase, from October 2016 to mid-2017, it was highly likely all 3 were held simultaneously in the pit, each secured by a different length chain, reflecting individualized control levels. During this phase, the first chain's wear and notebook symbol density indicated the period of greatest victim resistance or movement attempts. By late 2017, forensic data showed Lucas as the first victim to die, based on bone decomposition and body placement in the first side tunnel. After Lucas's death, notebook symbol rhythm decreased, indicating fewer captives. In the next phase, from 2018 to mid-2019, second chain data indicated at least 1 victim remained restrained. Second chain wear matched 12 to 18 months of use, overlapping with the period Maya was determined to still be alive in the tunnel. Mineralization in Maya's soft tissue and cervical bone injury structure indicated death from external force, not illness or accident. Maya's body was subsequently moved to the second side tunnel and placed under a boulder for concealment. The final timeline phase, from 2019 to Evan's discovery in 2021, was determined primarily from Evan's medical data, muscle atrophy, vitamin D deficiency, and malunion fractures indicated prolonged immobility, no light, no movement, and severe ration control. Fingernail and skin condition matched repeated restraint contact. This aligned with the third chain's lower wear, indicating use likely in the final captivity stage. From comprehensive forensics, the investigation team reconstructed the perpetrator's control model, initially holding all three in the pit, then isolating individuals, causing Lucas's death, continuing to hold Maya longer before killing her, and finally retaining Evan for the longest period. This model demonstrated escalating control behavior, maintaining victims until they lost resistance capacity or the perpetrator's purpose changed. By the end of August 10th, the nearly 5-year captivity timeline reconstruction was completed at the forensic level, clarifying the sequence of events, systematic control degree, and intentional lethal behavior toward Lucas Brann and Maya Ellison. With the questions what happened and how it happened answered by scientific data, the investigation focus shifted to the remaining decisive question: who created and maintained this entire captivity system? From that point, on August 11, 2021, the Joint Investigation Team entered the suspect identification phase, cross-referencing all evidence collected in the tunnels with resident data, activity history, and personnel records of those who had lived or worked around the Elkmont mining area. The first step focused on three main evidence groups: polyethylene fibers from old-style sacks, iron chains and wall-mounted bolts manufactured to 1960-1980 standards, and corroded metal vent pipes with size and threading compatible with early 20th century manual mine designs, but reused by local miners in later self-modified structures. Cross-referencing results showed flat polyethylene sacks of this type were largely out of commercial circulation in Tennessee after 1995, but still appeared sporadically in households formerly employed in mining or storing rented materials from old scrapyards. Wall bolts found in the pit showed hand tool grinding marks under microscopy, not standard sealed mine bolts, indicating they were removed from old structures or remachined. Vent pipe threading was characteristic of Elkmont mines in the 1915-1920 period, but due to repeated reuse in post-mining era self-dug tunnels, possession or transport of such pipes to the captivity area indicated local knowledge and access to old mine scrap piles. From evidence analysis direction, the FBI and sheriff compiled a list of residents within a 10-mile radius of Elkmont, with occupations related to mining, heavy mechanics, tunneling, or history of accessing old mine areas. The initial list of 42 people was quickly narrowed to 8, when additional factors were cross-referenced: prior employment in mines before full closure, ability to survive rugged terrain, and history of violence or deviant behavior. Among them, one individual stood out far above the rest: Harold Boone, 52 years old, residing in a log cabin less than 3.2 miles by direct line from Elkmont Ghost Town. Occupational records showed Boone had worked as a freelance miner in his youth for small private teams in Sevier and Blount counties. In the late 1990s, Boone was among the few locals hired to clean up leftover materials around Elkmont, including sacks, tunnel supports, vent pipes, and old tools. This matched the evidence found in the tunnels. Police records confirmed Boone had a history of violence: a 1999 assault on a roommate, a 2006 threat with an edged weapon, and multiple documented aggressive incidents while intoxicated. Though lacking serious convictions, this behavioral pattern drew particular attention when viewed alongside the control and violence models shown at the Elkmont scenes. Additionally, Ranger data showed Boone had been warned for trespassing in restricted mine areas in 2012, but not prosecuted due to insufficient evidence. Boone's cabin had a strategic location near a side trail leading to the intersection of 3 side tunnels, where Lucas and Maya's bodies were found, and only over 2 miles of forested terrain from ventilation point VP3. More notably, this trail was not common among typical hikers. Only locals familiar with the terrain would know it. When the FBI behavioral analysis team reviewed the captivity timeline and restraint control model, they determined the perpetrator was very likely a solitary individual, accustomed to confined space labor, capable of self-constructing and repairing tunnels, and experienced with old materials under limited equipment conditions. Boone matched all these factors. By noon, on August 11th, after the investigation team synthesized physical evidence, resident data, old criminal records, and geographic positioning, they created a comparison table showing Boone achieved the highest match across the entire suspect list. 14 out of 17 forensic behavioral geographic criteria aligned with the perpetrator profile. Based on the suspicion level, the Sevier County Sheriff's Office immediately requested the district court to issue a search warrant for Harold Boone's cabin and all auxiliary structures within his property boundaries. The search warrant was signed late that afternoon, authorizing investigators to access the cabin, storage shed, material pit, dry well, and surrounding forested area to search for evidence related to the abduction, captivity, and murder of 2 victims, as well as to collect any traces potentially linking Boone to Evan Marsh. At this point, the suspect identification process had shifted from indirect analysis to direct confrontation, with Harold Boone becoming the central figure in the entire investigation. On August 12, 2021, immediately after the search warrant for Harold Boone's cabin was signed, the Sevier County Sheriff's Office, in coordination with the SWAT team and K-9 unit, executed a high-risk approach plan for apprehending a suspect considered dangerous and potentially violent. By 6:40, the tactical team approached the wooden cabin deep in the Elkmont forest, surrounded by 2 old sheds and an area filled with waste materials from the old mining era. When the officers announced the search warrant and ordered Boone to come out, there was no response from the cabin. SWAT breached the front door, but upon entry, they discovered that the back door was open and there were signs that Boone had fled into the forest just minutes earlier. The team leader immediately deployed the K-9 unit to track the scent from Boone's jacket hanging inside the cabin. The dogs picked up the scent quickly and led directly into the forest in a southwest direction, where the terrain was steep with numerous small trails that only someone familiar with the area could navigate rapidly. The pursuit lasted nearly 15 minutes until Boone was taken down by a K-9 next to a narrow rock crevice. Boone resisted fiercely, swinging a wooden stick wildly, but he was subdued with an arm lock after the K-9 attacked his lower leg. When apprehended, Boone was dirty, his clothes torn, his feet covered in mud, and he was not carrying any firearms, only a folding knife. The SWAT team transported Boone back to the cabin to continue the search pursuant to the court warrant. Inside the cabin, the investigative team seized a series of items that significantly heightened suspicions. On the wall above the wooden table was an old printed map of the Appalachian Trail, spread out and marked with red symbols and diagonal lines that corresponded to the locations of side trails leading into the Elkmont area and the VP3 zone, where the auxiliary shafts were discovered. These markings did not match any commercial maps, indicating that Boone had personally noted secret entry and exit routes that most hikers would not know about. In the table drawer, investigators found a rusted metal tool set, including wire cutters, a handsaw, old-style bolts, and small iron hooks, all showing signs of manual grinding or bending similar to the marks on the evidence recovered from the pit. When comparing the bolt sizes from the cabin to samples from the shaft, the forensics team determined that the thread pattern and diameter were nearly identical, increasing the likelihood that Boone was the one who modified or repurposed mining materials to create the restraint devices. In Boone's bedroom, under the floorboards, the search team discovered a small locked metal box. After breaking the lock, they found a memory card and 3 old USB drives. When the technical team accessed the USBs using a mobile forensic workstation, they discovered multiple video clips recorded in dark spaces, illuminated only by flashlight beams and accompanied by heavy breathing sounds. Some clips showed images of a person restrained with short chains, hands placed against the rock wall. Although most videos did not clearly show faces, the rock structure in the footage matched that of the pit, leading investigators to assess these as direct evidence of the victims being held in the shaft. In addition to the videos, inside the same metal box was a worn leather notebook containing pages of notations in symbols similar to cycle markings, organized in a systematic manner like an internal rule set. Although the specific content could not be deciphered, the behavioral analysis team identified that the time-based divisions and symbol sequences matched the symbol log recovered from the shaft, indicating that the same individual created both sets of markings. In the external storage shed near the cabin, the search team recovered 2 flattened polyethylene bags identical to the type with microfibers adhering to Evan's clothing, along with an old vent pipe nearly 1 meter long, leaning against the back wall of the shed. The threading and rust pattern matched the vent pipe sample found in the shaft, strengthening the link between the cabin and the crime scene. In the same shed, they also found a pair of moldy hiking boots with cut laces, the inside stained with reddish-brown mineral soil, matching the sample taken from Evan's fingernails. All evidence was tagged, photographed, and sealed on site. After securing the key items, the sheriff's office formally arrested Harold Boone as the primary suspect in connection with 3 offenses: kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, and murder. Boone was removed from the cabin under SWAT supervision and transported to the Sevier County Jail for interrogation. The arrest of Harold Boone marked the most significant turning point since Evan Marsh's emergence. From indirect suspicion, the investigation now had a specific subject with a series of evidence directly linking the cabin, the detention shaft, and the 3 victims. On August 13, 2021, just 1 day after Harold Boone's arrest and the recovery of substantial evidence from his cabin sufficient to directly connect it to the Elkmont crime scene, the multi-agency investigative team decided to conduct a second comprehensive interview with Evan Marsh. Evan's medical and psychological condition still required close monitoring, but doctors confirmed he was stable enough to provide structured information, provided the interrogation was conducted in a low-stress controlled environment and avoided triggering panic responses. The session took place in a private medical room at Knoxville Hospital, with dim lighting, minimal noise, and the presence of a psychologist to monitor Evan's reflexes throughout the process. Investigator Sanderson began by asking Evan to recount the initial hours after the group of 3 disappeared on October 15, 2016. After a few minutes of deep breathing to stabilize himself psychologically, Evan stated that shortly after leaving their campsite and hiking less than an hour along the Appalachian Trail, the 3 noticed thicker fog and strange sounds coming from the forest to the west. He recounted that Lucas was a few meters ahead, with Maya close behind, when suddenly there was a loud noise from the left side of the trail, followed by the sound of metal striking rock. Before they could react, a man emerged from behind a large rock cluster and struck Lucas hard on the head with a hard object, causing him to collapse immediately. Evan stated that the man, now identified as Boone, held a length of rope and immediately subdued Maya with a chokehold from behind. When Evan tried to run, Boone threw a metal object at his legs, causing him to fall, then overpowered him with superior strength. Evan described Boone as speaking little, issuing only short commands, including the repeatedly used phrase, "down below. Don't look back." This was one of the keyword responses Evan had unconsciously repeated during his psychological evaluation, enabling investigators to confirm that his memories and behavioral reflexes originated directly from the perpetrator. According to Evan, Boone bound all 3 with coarse rope, tied them together in a line, and forced them to move along a small trail deep into the forest, taking nearly an hour to reach what Evan described as a steep area with flat rocks. There, Boone pulled aside a rotted wooden cover to reveal the carefully concealed shaft entrance, then pushed each person down using a temporary wooden ladder. Evan, the most alert at the time, clearly remembered Boone closing the shaft door immediately after descending, plunging the entire space into complete darkness. When asked about the early days in the shaft, Evan attempted to describe them in sequence. Boone used 3 pre-mounted iron chains on the wall to secure each person. Lucas closest to the shaft entrance, Evan in the middle, and Maya deeper in the dark corner. Boone imposed rules from the very first night: no talking when he entered the shaft, no moving beyond the chain limits, no tapping on rocks or making noise, and absolutely no looking directly at him when he shone his light. These rules matched the symbol notations recovered from the shaft, where the rhythm and frequency of markings reflected the cycles of Boone's appearances to bring water and minimal rations. Evan stated that in the first year, Boone's visits to the shaft were irregular, sometimes days apart, sometimes much longer. Each time he brought water, he checked the chains and surrounding area, occasionally banging the flashlight butt against the rock wall to intimidate. Lucas weakened gradually over several months, partly due to the untreated initial head injury and partly due to dehydration and malnutrition. Evan described Lucas's death in a brief phrase: "He just stopped responding." Afterward, Boone entered the shaft, checked the body for a few seconds, then dragged Lucas away by grabbing his collar and pulling him out of the pit. This aligned with the drag marks on the ground where Lucas's body was discovered. When asked about Maya, Evan's demeanor changed noticeably, his voice trembled, and his breathing quickened. He said that after Lucas's death, Boone changed the detention positions. He moved Evan to the third chain, the one with the least wear in the forensic analysis, and secured Maya in Evan's former spot. When asked about the cause of Maya's death, Evan could not recount it fully, but confirmed that Boone strangled her after one instance of resistance. This timeline matched the forensic findings, confirming cervical spine damage in Maya and estimating her time of death at approximately 2 to 3 years after abduction. Evan stated that Boone often kept Maya in an auxiliary shaft for hours or days at his discretion before returning her to the pit, but on the final occasion, Boone dragged her away and never brought her back. Evan's descriptions matched the condition of Maya's body found in the second auxiliary shaft and the way a large rock had been placed over her legs to conceal the body. Investigator Sanderson continued questioning about the final period, the phase during which forensics determined Evan had been alone in the shaft for nearly 3 years. Evan described this as a time when Boone visited less frequently, intervals between water deliveries lengthened, and rations decreased significantly. He said he had not seen light for a very long time, sitting against the rock wall, until losing sensation in his legs, which matched the severe muscle atrophy and vitamin deficiency. Regarding his escape, Evan only remembered that Boone had not visited for many weeks. Then one night water began seeping in from a rock crevice after heavy rain. The soil behind the pit partially collapsed, creating a small gap that Evan, exhausted at that point, gradually widened with his hands until a small stone slab came loose and opened an escape route toward the mountainside. The interview lasted nearly 2 hours before concluding due to signs of psychological overload in Evan. When systematizing all the statement data, the investigative team cross-referenced every detail with forensic evidence. Lucas's bone injuries matched the initial blow. Maya's neck injuries aligned with the strangulation account, chain wear matched the detention sequence, body positions matched Evan's description of Boone dragging each victim away, and the described rules Boone imposed matched the notebook symbols and Evan's behavioral reflexes. By the end of August 13th, Evan Marsh's complete statement had become the decisive eyewitness piece, linking Boone's actions to the entire nearly 5-year captivity chain of events. On August 14, 2021, immediately after Evan Marsh's comprehensive statement was obtained and successfully cross-referenced with all forensic data, the Sevier County District Attorney's Office began compiling evidence to form the formal indictment against Harold Boone. An expanded meeting took place at 8 o'clock with participation from the chief prosecutor, the TBI forensics team, FBI representatives, the sheriff's investigative team, and behavioral experts. The objective was to determine the charges with sufficient basis to prosecute Boone based on direct and circumstantial evidence collected over the past 6 days. Based on the dual auxiliary shaft crime scene, the condition of Lucas and Maya's bodies, Evan's statement, and Boone's arrest activities, the prosecutor decided to charge Boone with 4 major offenses: first-degree murder for both Lucas Brann and Maya Ellison, kidnapping related to the abduction of Evan Marsh and the 2 deceased victims, false imprisonment for the nearly 5-year detention period, and aggravated torture. Based on chain wear marks, old wounds on Evan's body, and evidence of Boone's continuous imposition of control rules under inhumane conditions. After determining the charges, the investigative team began compiling the official evidence list according to court standards. The first category was forensics from the Elkmont shaft, including 3 chains with varying wear levels, wall-mounted bolts, old vent pipe, scratch marks on the rock walls, blood samples positive for hemoglobin, a handkerchief embroidered ME, denim fabric scraps and cotton shirt fragments matching Lucas and Maya's clothing, and detailed diagrams of the pit structure and the 2 auxiliary shafts where the bodies were found. The second category was evidence seized from Boone's cabin. The Appalachian Trail map with markings matching shaft locations. The manually ground metal tool set, polyethylene bags with microfibers matching those on Evan's clothing. A nearly 1-meter vent pipe matching the shaft sample, hiking boots, stained with mineral soil identical to that in Evan's fingernails, and the metal box containing USB drives, and the symbol notebook. These items not only linked Boone to the detention shaft, but also demonstrated his intent and terrain knowledge. The third category was the videos on the USB drives, recording images of victims chained in the dark shaft, with flashlight reflections on the walls and wall structures matching the pit exactly. Although not all video segments clearly showed victims' faces, the matches in chain positions, rock walls and restraint tools were sufficient to create an undeniable connection. The fourth category was the forensic timeline, compiled from bone and soft tissue decomposition levels, times of death for the 2 victims, chain wear rates, and symbol rhythm in the notebook. This timeline demonstrated the sequence of detention, death body relocation, and continued detention, providing evidence of prolonged criminal conduct over time and showing high consistency between Evan's statement and forensic analysis. The fifth and most critical category was the direct statement from Evan Marsh, the sole survivor. In the court file, Evan's statement was divided into sections: description of the abduction process, description of transport into the shaft, description of the rules and coercive behaviors Boone imposed, description of the time Lucas weakened and died, description of the actions causing Maya's death, and description of the period Evan was detained alone until escape. Each section had direct cross-references to physical evidence or forensic data, ensuring consistency and resilience against legal challenges. The prosecutor then created an evidence linkage table arranging each item of evidence with corresponding parts of the statement and forensic data. For example, the blow to Lucas's head matched the skull fracture and the statement description, where on the second chain matched the period Maya was still alive, the cabin vent pipe matched the shaft vent pipe, or the drag marks on the stone floor matched the description of Boone pulling Lucas out of the pit. These pairings were constructed to create a seamless chain of reasoning for court presentation, ensuring no element relied on speculation, and each had at least 2 independent sources of evidence supporting it. By the end of August 14th, the entire indictment file was completed in its first draft, over 240 pages thick, including the evidence list, forensic descriptions, captivity timeline, Evan's statement, shaft structure analysis, Elkmont maps, and all crime scene photographs. The chief prosecutor signed initial approval and forwarded the file to the preliminary hearing preparation unit, marking the formal indictment of Harold Boone with the most severe charges under Tennessee law for premeditated kidnapping, imprisonment, and murder. On November 22, 2021, the Harold Boone case officially went to trial at the Sevier County Courthouse with the full attendance of the prosecutor, the investigation team, expert witnesses, and a jury of 12 members. The trial lasted several days, but the core portion took place during the first public session, where the prosecutor presented the entire case file through a seamless chain of arguments based on forensics, cabin physical evidence, the surviving witnesses' testimony, and video recovered from the USB drive in the metal box. Opening the proceedings, the prosecutor emphasized the particularly heinous nature of the case: 3 victims abducted and held captive for nearly 5 years, 2 deceased with signs of homicide, and the surviving victim carrying medical and psychological injuries consistent with a pattern of prolonged captivity. Following the opening, the prosecution called its first witness, the lead TBI forensic pathologist, to present the forensic analysis. Using a series of images projected on the screen, the doctor described the degree of skeletal decomposition in Lucas Brand, the skull fracture with sharp edges, consistent with a forceful blow from a blunt object, and the remaining soft tissue of Maya Ellison, showing cervical spine damage and rib fractures that could not have been caused by an accident. The doctor continued by analyzing soil samples from Evan's fingernails and evidence from the cabin, pointing out matches with mineral soil from the Elkmont mining area, confirming that the captivity environment was completely isolated from the natural surroundings outside. When the prosecutor asked for an explanation of the wear on the 3 sets of chains, the forensic pathologist presented a comparison chart showing that each chain segment corresponded to the 3 phases of captivity while aligning with the victim's times of death. This data caused a prolonged silence in the courtroom due to its absolute persuasiveness. Next, the prosecutor played the video recovered from the USB in the cabin. Although the clip did not show the perpetrator's face, the fluctuating flashlight beam, stone wall structure, chain positions, and the sound of dragging chains all matched the pit at Elkmont. Another video showed footage of a person shackled with short chains, with Boone's voice issuing a short command identical to the one Evan had repeatedly uttered during his psychological evaluation. The defense attorney attempted to object to the playing of the video, arguing that it did not identify the victims or the perpetrator, but the judge overruled the objection because the video had been verified through geographic forensics, lighting, stone structure, and pit evidence. The most critical witness, Evan Marsh, was called that afternoon. He entered the courtroom with assistance from medical staff, avoiding eye contact with Boone as instructed by the psychological expert. When questioned, Evan described in a quiet and trembling voice what had happened, how Boone knocked Lucas unconscious, how he bound the 3 of them and forced them into the pit, the rules Boone imposed, and the moment Maya was strangled. Although Evan's testimony was hesitant and at times fragmented, the jury clearly sensed the authenticity of every detail because forensics had corroborated all of his descriptions. After Evan, the prosecutor called the psychologist who had evaluated Evan's behavior during the initial interrogation. The expert presented the conclusion that Evan exhibited reflexes of fear toward open doors and bright light, along with a waiting for orders response, signs that only appear in victims subjected to behavioral control in prolonged captivity environments. When asked to describe Boone's control pattern, the expert stated, "This is not someone who accidentally caused death. This is the behavioral pattern of a controller who imposes and maintains victims as tools under his power." The defense attempted to argue that Boone had merely stumbled upon the pit and that the cabin evidence did not prove his involvement in the captivity, but the prosecutor countered with a chain of connections between physical evidence, forensics, and testimony. The cabin vent pipe matching the pit vent pipe, the cabin burlap sacks matching fibers on Evan's clothing, cabin boots with mineral soil matching pit samples, the cabin map marked with the exact pit location, and cabin video matching the pit structure. When the closing arguments concluded, the jury was asked to retire for deliberation. After nearly 3 hours of private discussion, they returned to the courtroom with a unanimous verdict: guilty on all counts, including first-degree murder for 2 victims, kidnapping, false imprisonment, and aggravated torture. The judge imposed the sentence that same day at the prosecutor's request: life without the possibility of parole. Harold Boone was handcuffed and removed from the courtroom under heavy security. He offered no final words beyond a blank expression. This verdict officially closed the criminal trial phase and confirmed Boone as the person responsible for the chain of captivity and 2 murders in the Elkmont mining area. After the trial ended, and Harold Boone was sentenced to life without parole, the Sevier County Sheriff's Office moved into the final phase of the case, assessing consequences, supporting the surviving victim and the families of the 2 deceased victims, and completing the procedures to close the file. In early December 2021, the University of Tennessee Medical Center reported an update on Evan Marsh's condition. His physical state had improved enough to allow independent movement with minimal assistance, but his muscular system remained weak due to years of captivity and restricted movement. Bone structure was being monitored with a regimen of vitamin D supplementation and long-term rehabilitation. Psychologically, Evan still showed startled responses to door sounds, bright lights, and sudden silhouettes, but with controlled exposure therapy, the frequency of reactions gradually decreased month by month. The psychologist noted that Evan had begun to more clearly distinguish between captivity memories and the present, though he still experienced nights reliving the sound of metal scraping stone or Boone issuing commands in the darkness. Evan's family reported that he had not yet returned to his old home, but was staying in a specialized recovery facility where the environment was controlled to avoid triggering panic responses, though he had started keeping a journal as part of cognitive recovery therapy. During the same period, the remains of Lucas Brann and Maya Ellison were returned to their families after all forensic analyses were completed and death records were officially signed. Private memorial services for each family were held in a discreet atmosphere. Both families subsequently expressed gratitude to the investigation team for uncovering the truth after nearly 6 years of disappearance. They emphasized that recovering the bodies and establishing the truth allowed them to end years of living in limbo about whether their children were alive or dead, which they described as a painful but necessary relief. On the part of Great Smoky Mountains National Park, a decision was made in late December to erect a small memorial marker along the Appalachian Trail near Newfound Gap, where the group of 3 had begun their final hike. A wooden plaque engraved with the names of Lucas and Maya, along with recognition of Evan's survival journey, was placed in a safe location without revealing the Elkmont site to prevent curious public intrusion into the restricted mining area. The park also implemented enhanced warning routes for hikers, including updated maps of hazardous zones and increased ranger patrols during peak seasons. From a community perspective, the Boone case left a profound impact. Hiking groups in Tennessee and North Carolina stepped up sharing of safety guidelines, recommending against solo travel through remote sections near Elkmont and Clingman's Dome. Sevier County organized survival skills and wilderness awareness training sessions, stressing the importance of reporting unusual sounds or objects on the trail. In terms of the justice system, the case was incorporated into FBI and Ranger training materials as a classic example of long-term captivity in remote terrain, with particular emphasis on the value of environmental forensics and geological cross-matching. In early 2022, the Sheriff's Office officially closed the case file after all conclusion, prosecution, and trial procedures were completed. The final report, over 300 pages long, was archived among the most serious cases ever recorded in the Smokies region. In the report's conclusion, lead investigator Sanderson included a brief note on the case's significance. "We cannot erase the years of suffering the victims endured, but we can ensure that their story becomes a shield protecting those who will pass through these woods after them." Sevier County views the Boone case as a reminder that even in the most peaceful natural settings, hidden dangers can exist, and the hiking community must remain vigilant, thoroughly prepared, and supportive of one another to prevent similar tragedies. With Evan gradually recovering and the 2 families receiving their loved ones' remains, the Elkmont case was officially closed, but its impact will linger long in the community, in investigative records, and in efforts to enhance safety across the entire Appalachian Trail. The story of 3 young people vanishing on the Appalachian Trail, and the horrifying truth revealed nearly 5 years later, is not merely a personal tragedy. It reflects real dangers that exist in modern American life, especially for those who love outdoor activities, solo camping, or exploring vast wilderness areas. From Harold Boone's case, several important lessons can be drawn. First, confidence when entering the wild must be paired with full awareness of risks. Evan, Lucas, and Maya were all experienced trail hikers, but the detail of them noticing strange lights and hearing metal clanging against stone the night before their disappearance shows that unusual signals should never be ignored. In real life, hikers in the United States should always follow the principle, if something feels off, it probably is. If something makes you uneasy, do not dismiss it. Second, the story underscores the importance of sharing your itinerary, sending location updates, and keeping family or friends informed of your schedule. Because the group had provided specific route information, search teams were able to identify the last known point. This is a practical lesson for millions of Americans who enjoy adventure. Timely information can be the difference between life and death in an emergency. Third, the Boone case also demonstrates the power of modern forensics and cross-agency investigation processes. The truth emerged thanks to analysis of mineral soil in Evans' fingernails, chain wear patterns, old-style vent pipes, and Boone's modified map. This reflects a reality. In modern society, justice relies not only on testimony, but on science, and every small detail matters. Finally, Evans' recovery, though marked by deep trauma, reminds the American community of human resilience and the importance of psychological support for surviving victims. Reactions such as fear of door sounds or bright lights are real consequences of captivity, and Americans today need to understand that healing is a long journey requiring respect and empathy. Through this story, the greatest message for American society is stay vigilant, prepare thoroughly, support one another. Because even amid the majestic beauty of the Smokies, danger can sometimes be just one narrow trail away. Thank you for following this haunting yet important story. If you want to continue joining these journeys into investigations and survival in America's wilderness, please subscribe so you don't miss the next video. See you in the next journey, where we will continue exploring lessons to make every trip safer.